Scott Pilgrim EX is a game about the past. It's a beat-em-up revival based on a 2010 video game adaptation, which released alongside the film of the same name that year, of a graphic novel, which itself ran from 2004 to 2010. Put simply, Scott Pilgrim as a series is now old enough to drink, and it's one that was already steeped in nostalgia and dealing with the passage of time. It's fitting then that Scott Pilgrim EX also deals with time travel, while being a damn good modern beat-em-up in the midst of the genre's own resurrection. The story here is pretty simple. The setting is Toronto, 20XX. Scott's band Sex Bob-omb is practicing for their latest show when Metal Scott, who looks like he stepped out of Mega Man X, band naps Sex Bob-omb and their instruments, except for Scott, naturally. Major bummer, dude. Your job is to save the band, recover their instruments, make it to the big show on time, and maybe save the city in the process. To do so, you'll have to go through the three gangs that have taken over the city: the vegans, the robots, and the demons, traverse time and space, and take down the mysterious forces manipulating all of this from the shadows. It's standard beat-em-up stuff, but it does lead to some extremely funny conversations in which your co-op partner, in complete seriousness, will ask, "Do you want to fight the vegans?" The answer, by the way, is always yes. What makes the conceit interesting is the playable cast Developer Tribute Games has assembled here. You've got Scott and Ramona, of course, but you're also joined by former villains like Robot-01, as well as several of the evil X's, specifically Roxy, Matthew, Lucas, and Gideon. Everyone's a little different. Scott's your all-arounder, Ramona's big hammer makes her a mid-range monster, Lucas is a big beefy boy who plays exactly how you'd think, Gideon is all about pressure and big damage, Matthew is a puppet character, in a beat-em-up. So cool. Robot's a zoner, Roxy is a ninja. If you've ever played a fighting game, you're probably feeling right at home. What's cool is how different everyone plays. The whole gang has light and heavy attack strings, the former excelling combos, while the latter is great for stunning vegans, robots, and demons alike, but they've also got several metered and unmetered special attacks that really separate them, whether that's Gideon's spinning sword parry, Ramona's subspace sucker punch, or Robot's grenades. Scott Pilgrim EX is one of the few beat-em-ups that lets you block attacks, and there are several advanced techniques like quick-stepping, several kinds of wake-ups, and using a metered super to avoid an attack, which don't cost your guts points as it normally would. You've also got equipable assist attacks, which also cost GP. That can be as simple as calling a couple guys to rock out and restore your health, breaking out Ramona's cat Gideon, who flies around the screen and causes problems, or my favorite, bringing out Sex Bob-omb superfan Young Neil to stampede across the screen. Many a boss has met their demise at the hands of Young Neil, let me tell you. The result is a pretty complex beat-em-up that rewards you for messing around with its systems. Is it as deep as something like Streets of Rage 4? No. But there's a lot here, and all of it feels good. I cannot overstate how important feel is for a beat-em-up, and you'll recognize it immediately when one just doesn't have the juice. Scott Pilgrim EX feels good. The original Scott Pilgrim didn't feel bad, but it was a much slower, simpler game. You had fewer options, and getting hit meant standing there for a moment and realizing someone had just punched you in the face. I wouldn't quite put it up there with Tribute's own Shredder's Revenge, which is one of my favorite beat-em-ups of the last 15 years, but it's close. The other neat thing is that EX is kind of an RPG. Defeated vegans, demons, and robots will drop coins you can spend in shops to buy equipments that boost stats and badges that offer special effects. Two of my favorites are Big Nickel, which boosts the amount of money you pick up, and the Wallace plushie, which gives you GP when you land hits, perfect for making sure Young Neil, I seriously cannot overstate how good he is ready when you need him. Enemies will sometimes drop permanent stat upgrades too, which you can also buy from shops in the forms of things like food and videotapes. Be warned, however, not all things are equal. If you're playing co-op, one of you buying a piece of equipment unlocks it for both of you. But if you want a stat boosting videotape, that only buffs the person who bought it. I learned that the hard way when my co-op partner, who had much more money than I did, bought them all, and I struggled to keep up afterwards. Thankfully, you can drop coins and health for your teammates if they're low on funds, need a boost, or have been KO'd. Though this is difficult to do in the heat of battle, I almost wish I could just lovingly tussle their hair as God intended.
You know your hair?
I know of it.
It's all blue.
And if you're worried about dying, grab some walking around food to heal on the go. You never know when you might need it. All of these systems work together quite well, but Scott Pilgrim EX's biggest accomplishment might be its world. This isn't a choose a stage and play it style beat 'em up. Toronto is an interconnected world that you travel around, whether you're taking a portal to the Ice Age on the beach, checking out the distillery district, or just walking down the street of the shopping area. It feels like a place, and I enjoyed learning its ins and outs as we explored it. And you'll never get lost because you're always told where to go next if you just want to get on with it. And if you don't, there's always something for you to do. Toronto is full of side missions, whether that means breaking a bunch of barrels, finding all the coins in an area within a time limit, or whatever else you stumble across. So much of what you find calls back to days past. Checkpoints look like they're straight out of Sonic. There are legally distinct Scorpion Kung Lao mashups, complete with spear and hat, and legally distinct piranha plants. The place you'll fight most demons is called Castlevania, and the nearby store is Cold Topic. One of the movies you can rent from No Account Video is called Army of Bones. The tagline, trapped in time, surrounded by evil, low on gas. Several of the storylines, such as the one where Kim is kidnapped by Simon Lee because he couldn't have her in high school, or the one where Maddie travels back in time, where big band sound was all the rage so he could live his dream, or the one where you help fix young Neil's broken Game Goose, reinforce the idea that time has moved on in Toronto, and here too. The stuff Scott Pilgrim references was much newer when the original graphic novel debuted in 2004. At the time, Mario was 19. Now he's over 40 years old. Time's passed. Several of the evil X's are helping Scott and Ramona out instead of fighting them. Even the genre Scott Pilgrim occupies is a product of the arcades, once an institution, now largely long gone. This is a sequel to a game that was released 16 years ago. The developer, ironically named Tribute Games, is probably best known for making the Turtles in Time sequel everyone always wanted and never got. Scott Pilgrim EX doesn't directly grapple with a lot of this, it's mostly small moments and asides, but in the last 16 years, the series has transformed from something that references older art into older art that is referenced. It must be a strange thing to realize that what you made is emblematic of a moment in time and how that moment is passed. To go from the new kid on the block riffing on the classics to the subject of your own retro revival. It's something I thought about often during my time with Scott Pilgrim EX, and while it doesn't go out of its way to draw attention to this concept, it's hard to argue that it isn't grappling with it, at least a little. And that makes it more interesting. Scott Pilgrim EX is the latest in a long line of retro revivals from Tribute Games, and like all of its previous works, the developer has done an admirable job of producing a beat-em-up that builds on its predecessor while adding much appreciated gameplay depth and plenty of replayability. I love EX's RPG systems, simple as they are, its world, and how there is always another interesting character to try when I get bored. But it's also a game that grapples with the passage of time, even if it perhaps doesn't mean to. The modern beat-em-up exists because of the games that came before, but they were often far more limited. Over time, we've returned to those ideas and refined them. Like Scott Pilgrim itself, those games have gone from something that was new to something that is now referenced. Nostalgia is a powerful drug, but a bittersweet one, and Scott Pilgrim EX understands that. You can go back in time, but you can't go back to the way things were. All that's left is to appreciate where you've been and enjoy what's here now. And you know what? What's here is pretty fun.
Reviews editor Tom Marks here with Will Borger to talk about his review of Scott Pilgrim EX a little bit more, or more specifically, beat-em-ups, because, Will, every time a beat-em-up is coming up, you message me and are like, I'm reviewing this, right? I get to review this. This is the one I get to review. And to that end, you have reviewed Ninja Gaiden Ragebound, Power Rangers Readers Rewind, Absolem for us. You've also done stuff like Rhythm Doctor, Romeo's a Dead Man. So just general action and rhythm-y and that sort of space as well. But tell me about your love for beat-em-ups, I guess is where I want to start. How'd you get into the genre? What do you love about the genre? All of that stuff.
So I am old, and I played beat-em-ups for the first time in actual arcades when I was a kid. So it was a lot of what was there, right? Because an arcade is an experience, and it depends entirely on what is in that arcade. So it was a lot of X-Men, which is a quarter muncher, and I didn't actually ever finish X-Men until I was an adult because I had enough disposable income to just be like, no, more quarters, more credits. But it was a lot of X-Men, there was a lot of Turtles in Time, a lot of the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, a lot of weirder stuff too, like occasionally you'd see like a Sailor Moon cabinet or something. There's a very weird beat 'em up if you've never played it. It was just one of those genres that was immediate, right? It was pretty easy to put a quarter in and play it. It really rewarded you for understanding the game. Like, if you got really good at Turtles in Time, you can do the whole game on one credit, right? That is a good use of your money if you are a kid and you got $5. In the same way, it's also, that they were co-op games. And a lot of the stuff in arcade was not something that you could play with friends. Some of it was. You had like light gun games and fighters that you could play against your friends. But if you're there as a group and you see the Turtles in Time cabinet, it's like, oh, all four of us can play the game at the same time. And so it becomes this kind of communal thing where like the first thing you do when you go into an arcade is figure out, all right, what do they have? Oh, there's a Turtles in Time machine. We're doing that, right? So, and then as they came home, it just became a natural extension of that, and so many games got re-releases starting about maybe 10 to 15 years ago for the genre that it became easier to access games that otherwise you would have to physically go to an arcade for. And so it just kind of stuck around as like I can play this with my friends, and they're quick too. Like if you're like, I have a couple hours, I don't want to get into anything too crazy, play beat 'em up. You have a good time.
Yeah, it's funny, you mentioning the Sailor Moon, it strikes me also as such a flexible genre. Like, it's wild to me that one of the most iconic, I would say, I think that's not controversial to say, in the genre is a Simpsons game. Is like, you don't really see that in a lot of other genres, I feel like. I'm curious, do you have, like, one that stands out from above the pack, or maybe a Mount Rushmore of beat-em-up games that you think are sort of like, I imagine Turtles in Time is up there, but, like, what do you see as the pinnacle?
I think, so it's funny because you can segment the beat 'em up as the originals and then kind of the more modern stuff, right? Turtles in Time is probably my favorite ever, just because it was the one I played the most as a kid, and I actually have a Super Famicom with a copy of Turtles in Time, just because I wanted to play it on that version of it. And it's weird as a game because there's no really distinct, I would say, definitive version of it. Because there's the arcade version and there's the home version, and they're different, right? So Turtles in Time, pick your version. They have their pros and cons. Is obviously up there. I think for the modern stuff, Streets of Rage 4, absolutely, really, really deep game, really beautiful. Takes Streets of Rage in a new way. It gives you a lot of player expression. Really rewards you for putting the time in, and all the characters feel really good. It's got great music. Like, if you had to retro revive Streets of Rage, it's really hard to think of how anybody could do it better than Streets of Rage 4.
So here's a question. You separated them into the old stuff and the modern stuff. Do you think, like you said, beat 'em up's an arcade experience. It is this kind of very specific thing. It is, to a certain extent, capitalistically trying to pull quarters out of your pockets to some degree. Do you think with the modern revivals and this sort of new wave of beat 'em ups and nostalgia-heavy beat 'em ups that we've seen, is there anything about the genre that, like, you think really needs to adapt or needed to adapt, and the best ones like Streets of Rage have adapted? Or do you think that it does just sort of hold up minus the quarters?
I think that's a really good question. I think the biggest thing that they needed to do was to have more reason for people to replay them, right? When you're in an arcade, you're going to an arcade for a reason, because you want to play games, right? And so the novelty of the arcade kind of re-incentivizes you to, like, oh, I love this game and it's at this arcade we're at, so I'm going to play it, right? Whereas at home, when you always have access to it, you're like, oh, I've beaten that. Maybe I want to play something else, right? If you remove kind of the constant access to it, it becomes, through scarcity, more valuable. So I think the biggest thing was trying to convince people that these games are... There's kind of a misconception around beat 'em ups that they're button mashy, that they're not very deep, that they're shallow, that they're short, right? And they are short usually, they're only a couple hours. But one of the things that's combated that, I think, in recent years, especially with something like Streets of Rage 4, is a very deep game. It has a ton of mechanical systems for you to learn. Scott Pilgrim, also to an extent, is fairly deep. It's a rare beat 'em up that lets you block. It is got things like quick steps, and you can use supers to dodge through attacks. So it really rewards you for learning its systems. So I think the thing that the beat 'em up is fighting is kind of this idea that there's not enough value for what you're doing. And the modern ones have figured out a way to be like, well, we're going to add gameplay depth. We're going to add more characters. All the characters are going to feel distinct. We're going to add New Game Plus. We're going to add replayability. We're going to add bonus stages. We're going to add, in the case of Absalom, we're going to make it roguelike, right? So that changes every time. So the big thing, I think, has just been to convince people that, it's not just this really hard genre that is designed to take your quarters. It also has these other things that are there. So adding those systems, I think, addresses those needs, but it's also kind of just making people aware that like the depth is there if you want it, right? Streets of Rage isn't a game you play through once, it's a game you play through dozens of times because you are not going to understand the systems. One thing I talk about with people a lot is like Devil May Cry, right? Like your first run through a Devil May Cry, which is functionally a 3D beat 'em up in the same way that Ninja Gaiden is you are learning the game. When you clear it on, Demon Hunter, like the basic difficulty, you haven't learned Devil May Cry. You have gotten to the point where the game starts. Everything after that is about learning the systems, figuring out how to be stylish, playing on higher and higher difficulties to challenge you. These games are meant to be replayed, and kind of what the beat 'em up has done is try to figure out how to get people into that mindset, right? So Absolem probably the most successful recently, just because it's easier to conceptualize like, roguelike, do it over and over and over again. But the actual beat 'em up as a genre encourages, mastery, replayability, learn this thing. If you've ever played or seen someone who's really good at Final Fight play Final Fight, it is amazing. They don't get hit. They know everything there is to know about that game. And you see them do it on one credit, and it's just because that they have mastered the systems there. So there's a tons of depth, but you just got to convince people to look for it.
Well, Will, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us about your love for this genre. And obviously, it comes through very loud and clear in any time you review one of these games. So it's great to chat with you about it. If you want more from Will, his last review was of Reanimal. Very much not a beat 'em up, different type of game, but the guy's got depth, so check that out if you want more of his thoughts and his critical style. If you want a different kind of side-scrolling action, we also did review God of War Sons of Sparta semi-recently, so you can check that out as well. And for everything else, keep it right here on IGN.